Hey everybody, welcome to Mammoth Interactive's YouTube channel. First of all, I want to thank you for watching this video. And remember that this channel doesn't do Patreon. Instead, we sell our digital courses down below. And every single dollar that we get from the products you buy below goes into making more content. The best way to help out this channel and Mammoth Interactive is to subscribe to Mammoth Interactive's huge library of content. Get thousands of hours and hundreds of courses for a low price down below. We have a monthly option and a yearly option. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the video.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to our course. In this lecture, we are going to learn how to install Homebrew and then also how to install MongoDB on Mac. So join me here on brew.sh. This is the site for Homebrew. After we learn how to install on Mac, in the next lecture, we'll talk about Windows. So here, Homebrew, the missing package manager for Mac or Linux. To install Homebrew, just copy this terminal command right here on the Homebrew homepage. You can click that clipboard icon to copy this command to your clipboard. Then let's go to the terminal on our computer. Here I am in the terminal, and I'm going to just paste in that command from the Homebrew page. So here we're specifying how we are going to be installing Homebrew. We're using Bash, and then we have the link to the script for installing Homebrew. You can press enter, and you'll be prompted to enter in your password. This is your administrator password for your computer. Next, you'll be prompted to either hit return to continue or any other key to quit. So hit enter or return on your keyboard. Return is just the enter key. Okay, there we go. And that is going to install Homebrew. Once you have installed Homebrew, then you can go ahead and install MongoDB. Make sure you read your messages here to make sure that you are able to install Homebrew. You can also run here to grab the unshallow clone of Homebrew if you'd like, unless you would like the shallow clone. So in this case, we're using a shallow clone, which will work. It's a smaller version. You can then check your version of Homebrew with the brew command here. All right, so here, if you type in brew, you'll get some prompts for available brew commands, like brew update, brew upgrade, brew uninstall, brew doctor for troubleshooting are commonly used ones. You can do brew-v to grab which version of Homebrew you're currently using. All right, next up, we are going to find the MongoDB tap on Homebrew. So we'll use brew tap MongoDB/brew, and we'll hit enter. Okay, next up, we're going to install MongoDB. So we're going to use brew install followed by MongoDB-community. So we're grabbing the community server edition, hit enter, and that will install the MongoDB server to your computer. So just give it a moment there to complete. Next up, we are going to create a database folder for our computer. As soon as this is completed, we can do that. So right now, Brew is installing some dependencies for my MongoDB community version, getting it ready for my version of Mac. Awesome, and we have been able to get MongoDB community. To have launched Start MongoDB now and restart at login, you can use Brew services start MongoDB brew, MongoDB community, or if you don't want or need a background service, you can just run mongod-config. So it's good to read the messages that come up here in your terminal. All right, next up, we are going to create a database folder on our computer. And for macOS Catalina and onward, we're going to use sudo mk directory. So sudo means we're accessing our admin, and we're going to be using make directory to create a new folder. This will be a private folder, and we're going to put it in the location system volumes/data slash data again, and then slash db. So here, this is required for Mac OS because Apple created a new volume in Catalina for security. And so we have to put our database into system volumes data. You can then hit enter and you'll be prompted to put in your password. And there we go. We've created our database folder inside of that path. We then have to get permissions or give permissions to be able to use the database. So we'll use sudo chown -r. Here we're then going to use backticks, which are next to your 1 on your keyboard, id-un, followed by /system/volume/data/database, db. So we're giving permissions to use the folder. Great. If you don't get any error messages, it means you've been able to successfully create the commands. Next up, we can launch our MongoDB. So I'm going to use sudo to access our admin. Then I'm going to use MongoD. Following that, I'm using the property database path to use my database path at /system/volumes/data/data/db. So my path to my database is this exact path on my computer. Then I'm going to hit enter, and that is going to start my MongoDB. All right, now we can put to use our MongoDB. We can use the Mongo keyword in another terminal, and we can use MongoDB commands. If you want to build an alias for your command, this long command, first let's just hit Control-C to cancel the MongoDB. And here you can see this command is quite long, this sudo MongoD, okay, because you have to pass in this database path. So if you want to create an alias here for this command, then what we can do is we can copy this command, and here I'm going to then use my alias MongoD, which means I can just use MongoD as the key for this entire command. All I have to do is use an equal sign followed by here quotation marks. Into the quotation marks, I'm going to paste in here my command that I just used. And also sometimes it doesn't work, so let me just recreate this alias. I'll exit out of that and go to alias MongoD. My copy paste didn't really work, so I'll just do it from scratch. We're using sudo MongoD --database path is at system/volumes/data/data/db. We can hit enter, and now if we use MongoD, this is just a shortcut. So now we have a shortcut for being able to launch MongoDB. And that is how you can install and launch MongoDB on Mac. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our course. In this lecture, you are going to learn how to install MongoDB on Windows. It's completely free and you don't even need an account if you're using the community server. So join me at mongodb.com/try/download/community. So you can also just search for the MongoDB community server. Here you can press download, and that is going to allow you to download this MSI file. So save the MSI file and then double click on it and follow the prompts to install Mongo. Unless you specify a custom directory, most likely Mongo will be installed into your default files where you have all of your programs. Once you have gone through the prompts to install Mongo, join me in your command prompt application. On Windows, this is called the command prompt, also commonly called the shell, the terminal, the command line. They're all the same thing. Here we're going to create the directory or folder where Mongo will store its files. So we're going to call MD, lowercase here, and we're going to call here \data/db. You might get the message the directory already exists. That's because I already have MongoDB. Otherwise, your folders will have this created. So wherever you are currently, here currently I'm inside of just my user account, Glitty. I've now created /data/db. This is the default location where MongoDB will store all of its files. Now you can, next up, try running the MongoDB daemon with MongoD. Okay, now if this doesn't work, you can also just launch the exe file. So just go into your program files, find Mongo, and then launch the exe file. For example, here I am under my program files and then MongoDB. You can go into the server 5.0, the bin, and here you can see you have MongoD. This is an application. All right, and we can see that if you double click on this application, it's the same thing as running the MongoD.exe file. Okay, so you can double click on that and it'll open up a terminal. You can also here copy the path to the MongoD.exe file. And then in your terminal, you can hit Control-C if you want to close the MongoD server. And then you can here, don't paste in the, just paste in the path itself. So if you paste in the path to your exe file in your terminal, it's the same thing as launching it. But what if you wanted to have a shortcut like just MongoD? So I'll hit Control-C here. So often you want to use a shortcut like MongoD in order to launch the exe file. You don't want to have to go through the entire path. All right, you don't want to type in this whole path every time that you want to launch the MongoDB. So for that, we can set up an environment variable that is going to allow us to just use an alias here on Windows for the exe file. And we'll do that shortly. But let's say we already have the MongoDB running here, which we do. You want to keep this open for the duration of your project because that means your server is running, your MongoDB server is running. If you close this down, then you no longer have access to the server unless you reopen it back up. Any files that you create in your Mongo database, any databases or tables that you create, they will be stored permanently here on your computer unless you want to delete them. And you can access them as long as you have MongoD, the daemon, running. And then you can close that and open it back up any day. Now, while the MongoDB daemon is running, from a second terminal or command prompt, you want to run your Mongo application. All right, so here I'm going to create a new terminal application. So I've just launched the command prompt a second time. And here I'm going to run not my MongoD, but my Mongo.exe file. So here in my files, it is not MongoD, it's Mongo. So this is the Mongo shell. MongoD is the Mongo daemon to start the MongoDB server. Mongo itself is the shell from which I can access my Mongo database. So I can copy the path to that or just double click on it to open it, or copy the path and then paste in the path and hit enter. That will start the Mongo shell. Here we can see we're connecting to MongoDB at localhost port 27017. So this is always going to be the location and the port of MongoDB. This is a Mongo shell, and here it's been superseded by Mongosh, but they're almost the same thing. Mongosh is just an improvement. So here, feel free to install Mongosh if you'd prefer, or you can just use the Mongo shell. But Mongo and Mongosh are almost the same thing. Mongosh is just an improvement if you'd prefer to use that. And as well, Mongo shell will be deprecated and removed in an upcoming release, so just use Mongosh as the equivalent if that's what you have. So here is where we can actually put in commands for our database. Like here is where we can create a new database in MongoDB. Here's where we can create a new table, put in new entries. We do that via the Mongo shell, mongo.exe. We have to keep our MongoDB daemon running if we want to be able to access the Mongo shell. Now, as we saw, we had to use long commands. We can Control C out of this at any time. We'll get by. We can see with the up arrow key, we had to use this long command to access Mongo, and the same thing for MongoD. So we can actually create an environment variable to allow us to use some kind of shortcut or alias for these commands. To update your Windows path environment variables, we are going to go to our control panel. So just find your control panel, then go to System and Security. Under System and Security, go to System. And here we're going to go into Advanced System Settings. Under there, we're going to go to Advanced, and we want to click on this button, Environment Variables. Here, we are going to click on Path. Under User Variables for your username, you have a bunch of different environment variables. We want to focus on the path environment variables. Here, we're going to press Edit, and this will open for us all of our path environment variables. And you can see here, I have created one for here my MongoDB, and you can also do the same for your Mongo shell. So all you have to do is hit New and then paste in the path to whatever path you want to access. Like as we had previously, we had here this path to mongo.exe. So you can copy this path to that exe file. Then you can paste it here into this program files, and then do the same for the MongoD as well. If you press OK and close and OK, then here, instead of using this command, this long command to start the Mongo shell, we can just use Mongo. Okay, just make sure there is no backslash. So now I've been able to just use Mongo to launch my command prompt here. And same thing for MongoD. I can use MongoD to just launch my MongoD executable. Now it's already in another different terminal here. In my case, I already have it launched in another terminal. But now we know that we can use Mongo and MongoD, just those aliases, because we have set our environment path variables. So that is how you can install MongoDB to a Windows computer and how to launch a MongoDB daemon and how to open the Mongo shell, which is where you write all of your commands to manipulate your Mongo database and any kind of databases you have in there in MongoDB. Coming up next, we're going to learn how we can actually create our own databases locally on our MongoDB right on our computer. So join me in our next section. Hello everyone and welcome back to our course. In this lecture, we are going to learn how to build a local MongoDB database. So join me in your terminal application, also called the command prompt on Windows or command line or shell. Here, we are going to get started. We assume that you already have MongoDB installed, which is what we showed you how to do earlier in the course. Next up, we are going to start our MongoDB daemon with our alias MongoD. If you get any error message, then just read what the error message is. For example, here, I'm getting an error message that my MongoD has shut down, so I can scroll up and see what started the shutdown. Okay, looks like here we see data directory data/db was not found. Create the missing directory. Okay, so that tells me instead of using MongoD, I can use instead my direct path here, sudo MongoD db path. So I can use my direct command of, let's see here, sudo MongoD --db path /system/volume/data/data/db. That is on Mac. On Windows, you can just launch your executable. And there we go. Now our MongoDB daemon is running. I know it's running because it says waiting for connections at its port. And I also know that it's running because here we have just a cursor and we don't see our username. All right, so we have MongoD started, a Mongo daemon. We need to keep this open as long as we want to work with our local Mongo database. MongoDB will stop as soon as I close this terminal or I kill my server, my daemon. I can kill the daemon by doing Control-C. As well, I can use kill all. I can use sudo kill all MongoD. So if you have a previous Mongo daemon running and you don't even realize, it will tell you in an error message, and then you can just do sudo kill all MongoD. If you have a Mongo daemon running somewhere, then it will kill it. It could even be running without a terminal open. Then you just have to launch it again with MongoD. And there we go. It works. Sometimes, again, MongoD doesn't work. You have to use the full command or just try it again or read whatever error message comes up. Okay, so now we have our daemon running. I am going to open a new terminal or a new command line, and I'm going to launch the Mongo shell. So here I am in a new terminal, and my other terminal is still running. Here I can open the Mongo shell by using the command mongo, or launching the Mongo executable if you're on Windows and you didn't set up the Mongo environment path variable. So here we are. You can also use mongosh as an alternative. And now here in the Mongo shell, this is where we can create our database. You can see which database you're currently at by using the command db and hitting enter. By default, you will be on the test database. Here, the little alligator bracket, the greater than symbol, that signifies that we are in the Mongo shell. It's not part of the command. It's just there to prompt you to give a new command to the Mongo shell. To create a new database, we use the command use. This will create or switch to a database. We can create a new database, for example, called courses. I'll hit enter and we get the result switched to database courses. And if we type db this time, we see we're no longer inside of test. We're now inside of courses. Now, what if I wanted to insert a new collection or table into my database and a new entry or row into the table? Well, to do that, in Mongo, a table is called a collection, and we can pass a JavaScript object as the row to a collection. To create or access a collection, we first access our database with db, and currently we're inside of the courses database. After that, we can either create a collection or use an already existing one. So let's say I have my database courses and I wanted to have a table or a collection of web dev courses. Well, then I can create that just by accessing db.webdevcourses. Then I can immediately insert a new entry into this table or collection with the function insert1. So here I'm using JavaScript to access my database. Into this function insert1, we are going to pass a JavaScript object. So we use curly brackets, and then inside of the object, we just pass in the properties and the values for the object. So an object is an entity of whatever you're trying to describe. This could be a person, it could be a web dev course, it could be an object, a product, and you use properties to describe the object. For example, a person might have a name, an age, as well as a birth date, an email address, and those are all properties of the person. Here, let's say we are adding a new entry of a web development course to our web dev courses table. We can give our course a name, such as, in single quotes, here is the format for our name, such as Hello HTML. So that is supposedly the name of a course. All right, so note here the format. We have here inserted one with that function, insert1, using JavaScript. The parameter of the function here is an object. So the argument we're passing in is an object. In JavaScript, an object is represented as a curly bracket, and inside of that, inside of the curly brackets, you have all the properties of an object. An object can have as many properties as you'd like. Okay, here I'm going to type this command and then I'm going to hit enter. Okay, here we get this result, acknowledged true and inserted ID, object ID. So this means we can reference our object, our Hello HTML course, via this object ID. We can try again. We can call db.webdevcourses. So we know we're inside of the courses database, and now we're inside of the web dev courses collection. Here I'm going to call insert1 and put in a new object here using JavaScript object notation. Then we can give this new course a different name like Hello CSS. Then I can hit enter. We get acknowledged true and inserted ID of the Hello CSS object. If you want to see all of the objects in a collection, remember an object is a row in the collection, you can call database.webdevcourses. So I'm accessing my database and I'm grabbing a table in the database. Then I can grab all of the rows in that table with the function find. So here I can press enter and this returns for me two objects. Here we get the ID of the object as well as the properties of the object. So in this case, we have two IDs and each of them has just one property, name. So by default, every object or row will have an ID, and as well they'll have a name because that's the property we set for each of the objects. And that is how you can create a Mongo database and how you can also access objects in there. Even if I kill my MongoDB server, I can still relaunch it and then have access to my database today, tomorrow, whenever. And it will be access that is local here from my computer. So all of this data is only available on your computer. Then you can send it to websites. Here I can kill my Mongo shell by going to my Mongo daemon and here using Control-C. So here I have shut down my Mongo daemon. Here in my Mongo shell, I can hit Control-C as well and you get the message bye. And so here we have stopped the Mongo daemon and the Mongo shell. We can restart the Mongo daemon with MongoD. You may be prompted to enter your password. Now our Mongo daemon is running again, waiting for connections. And I want to show you that we still have access to our web dev courses table. I have to use Mongo to launch a Mongo shell or Mongosh as an alternative. Then here I can access DB. By default, I will be inside of test. But then we can do the same steps that we just did where we specify what is the database we want to use. We're going to use the courses database. Then we can specify that we want to see all of the rows of a table. So let's use db.webdevcourses.find. And look at that, our two objects are still in there. So this proves that the data will persist. It's not data that is one-time use. Now, what if we tried to access a table that didn't exist? So how about did not exist table? Well, in that case, you'll just get nothing returned. And that is how you can create here a new Mongo database with entries that persist over time. Join me coming up next. We are going to learn how to connect to MongoDB with a Node server. So I'll see you in the next section.
Hello everyone and welcome to day 6 of Hello Coding. Today you're going to learn how to build a website with Node.js We're doing an introduction today, and you'll learn a lot more about Node later on in Hello Coding. We're going to get started by learning what is Node.js. Node.js is a JavaScript runtime that has several uses. One is to run a server. So Node.js can create a server and listen to incoming requests. This means that instead of building only local websites that you can visit on your computer and perhaps others could visit on their computer, instead you can build a shared site. So you can have one server with site content, and then different users can join the same instance of your site. This will open up a whole range of opportunities for you, because now you can build multiplayer sites such as multiplayer games or chat, or any website that you want to be updated live based on interaction from users on different computers. So now not only will you know how to build the front end of a website, which is the user interface, but you'll also learn how to build the back end of a website. So you'll learn how to create a server with Node.js and handle the back end of a server. So things like the database and any changes that you want to make based on one client or one visitor's interaction. As well, another use of Node.js is handling business logic. So with Node, you can connect to a database and handle requests from your site visitors. A database is used to store site data. For example, you could store profile information, you could store usernames, passwords, accounts. You could store different products if you were making a online store. So Node.js not only can build a server, but can also handle business logic. As well, it can validate input, so you can make sure you don't get invalid inputs or people trying to hack into your website. Another use of Node.js is to send responses. So your clients, your visitors will come to your website and send requests of where they want to go. And then you use your Node.js server to send a response. So you can send the user to different pages of your website. You can connect them to a chat room. You can join them into the game. And these responses come in many forms, such as rendered HTML. So your visitor will request to go to a page, and with your server, you will send them to a certain page of the site. This is different from just sending the user to a page locally via a reference link. Now we're going to learn how to send users to different pages with a server. And this is required for almost all websites, because some websites can be standalone, just visited on their computer if they're static. But for any complex project, any complex website, you will need a server, because you'll have multiple visitors and you'll have to get data from them and then update your website based on their data. For example, a visitor could come to your website and make an account, and you have to use a server to store their account information and then to send them to their account page, to send them to their shopping cart, to allow the user to visit a site, make a change, and then see that change the next day. For example, a to-do list that lasts for days on days instead of just being immediately cleaned when you refresh the page. And you do all of that with Node.js. There are, of course, alternatives, but Node.js is a very popular JavaScript runtime for creating a server. So you can send responses including data like JSON data, which is a data type, and much more, whatever response you want to send. Let's discuss more about the client and server model of computing, because this can take a bit of time to grasp if you've never heard of it before. The client refers to any visitor of your site, and they are going to ask for services, meaning they want to go to a page, they want to make an account, they want to play a multiplayer game. And the client is going to send a request whenever they join or visit your website. They're sending a request to your server, and the server performs services in response. For example, it can make an account for the client, it can connect the client to a live game, and etc. Any task that your website needs. So in terms of a website and web development, the browser is the front end, it's the client. Whenever the user pulls up their browser and types in your website, they're instantly going to become a client. Now the web server, that's the behind the scenes of your website. There is one web server, and then there are multiple clients. So any client that visits your website will connect to the same web server. And they do this online by using what's known as an HTTP request. And then the server sends an HTTP response, meaning these requests and responses, they're happening over the web. All right, and with the client is written in JavaScript, of course with HTML, CSS as well. Perhaps you're using React, perhaps you're using Vue as your front-end framework. The browser is written in JavaScript, and typically with web servers, they can use a variety of languages like PHP, C# and Ruby. And so that is an option for making a web server. You could create a web server in C#, for example, which is another programming language. But with Node.js, it allows everything to be done in JavaScript. So the browser, the front end of your website is written in JavaScript, and so is your web server. And that's the other benefit of Node.js, among all of its benefits, is that it allows you to work with JavaScript both on the front end of your website and on the back end of your website. JavaScript on the server looks like this. A person visits your website and they become a client, and then they send requests to the server to launch a site. And the server uses Node.js to do that. Then, after the server has received the request, they send the response back. So they send back the HTML page of dogs.com, for example. As well, the server can connect to a database. It can authenticate content, such as making sure that the password was entered correctly, making sure the user actually has an account. It can validate any input and perform other business logic. So the server can do quite a lot, and Node.js can as well. Other features of Node.js, not just creating a server, because Node.js is a JavaScript runtime, it means it can do a lot. It can create utility scripts, it can provide you with build tools, and much, much more. But for just starting out, we're going to learn how we can use Node.js to create a server. So later on today, we're going to learn how we can build a website and use Node.js to serve it. This means we're going to not just make the front end of a website, but actually the back end of a website. So multiple users will be able to visit the website and see the same content and also update it. This really opens up the power of you as a web developer, because now you're going to be able to make much more complex sites, not just local games, but multiplayer games, and not just a to-do list that is one-time use only, but a to-do list that can be stored over time with an account, for example. All right, let's get started. In the next lecture, we're going to dive deep into coding with Node.js.
Hello everyone and welcome back to our course. In this lecture, we are discussing how to install Node and NPM onto a Mac or Windows computer. So join me at the website nodejs.org and go to the Download tab. There we can download Node, and also this includes NPM. So here you can choose your installer, a Windows installer or a Mac OS installer, or even the source code. So if you have a Windows computer, use the Windows installer. If you have a Mac computer, use the Mac OS installer. Here for Windows, there's also options for 32-bit versus 64-bit. Likely your version of Windows is 64-bit because 32-bit is outdated. So choose the 64-bit version, or whichever one matches your computer, which is likely 64-bit. You can also install for Mac and even for Linux as well. Then just go through the steps of the installer. So you have to open up the MSI file or the package file, and you have to go through the steps of installation, just clicking through to install Node. And also NPM is going to be installed with Node. Then to check if you have Node and NPM, go to your terminal or command prompt or command line application. So here I am in my terminal, and I am going to check my Node version with the command node-v. Then I can check my version of NPM with npm-v. So you should get the results of which versions of Node and NPM you have. And if you don't, that means you have to reinstall or install in an alternate way. You can also install Node and NPM via version managers. The installer is not the only way. There are lots of ways to install Node and NPM. This is just the easiest. But if you're finding that the installer doesn't work, then you can try another option. Just go to the documentation for Node and NPM. And one thing to take note of is you should make sure to install Node and NPM into a global directory like users/your username, because that way you can use Node and NPM across all of the files inside of this folder. Because if you install Node and NPM into a subfolder, like just your project folder, then you'll only be able to use Node and NPM in that project folder. So you have to make sure to install it in some kind of global folder. And that is how you can install Node and NPM onto Mac, Windows, and as well Linux. And you can do that with the installer. So now that we have Node and NPM installed, we can put it to use in our project. Hello everyone and welcome back to our course. In this lecture, we are going to learn how we can connect to MongoDB with the native driver and a Node server. So here, make sure you have your Mongo daemon running, MongoD, if you want to be able to access MongoDB. Then let's create a new terminal where we'll create a new project with NPM and Node. So here I have a new terminal and I'm going to CD into my location where I want to create my project folder. Here I can create a new project folder with make directory and I'll call this Hello Mongo. I'll hit enter, then I'll CD into Hello Mongo. Don't forget that because when you make a directory, you don't automatically enter it. You have to enter it manually. So here now we are inside of a new project folder. Here we're going to use NPM to initialize a new Node project. So I'll use NPM init and I'm going to hit enter. Here you have to press enter to go through these different steps. Here it's just writing out the metadata for the project. Here you can press enter on the package name, the version, the description. Feel free to write a small description here if you'd like. A simple Mongo project and hit enter. The entry point will be a file called index.js, also commonly called server.js. This will be the entry point for the server. You can have a test command for running tests, a Git repository, keywords if you'd like. This stuff is not required. You can have a license, and then once you have all of your metadata, it will show it to you here as a preview, and you can hit enter for yes. And that is going to create for you a package.json file inside of your project folder. And that is going to allow you to just set up a new NPM project. Here you can also read some of the messages that it tells you. NPM init is a utility that will walk you through creating a package.json file. It covers only the most common items for the metadata. You can run npm help init for definitive documentation on the fields and exactly what to do. Use npm install afterward to install a package and save it as a dependency in the package.json file. So if you use npm install right now, here we audited one package. Okay, if you hit ls, you can see we now have package lock, which is just a locked version of the package.json. JSON is metadata. It's JavaScript object notation, a common format for saving data. All right, next here inside of our project, I'm going to use npm install, just like we just read we could, to install a new package inside of the project, and that is going to be MongoDB. So I'm going to be connecting to MongoDB with the MongoDB package. I'll also include -- save to save it. All right, so here we were able to add 17 packages. They're part of MongoDB. Okay, so in this case, we're using MongoDB, and we're going to be using that, the native driver, to connect to our database. And don't worry about this, it's just an NPM notice that NPM will soon be updating. Next up, we can list out our contents. So now we also have a node modules package or project folder, and this is going to contain all of the packages part of your project. All right, and you can also just see all of this in your computer directory under this project folder. Our next step is going to be to create a JavaScript file, and that will be index.js because we already specified that as our entry point. And inside of index.js, we'll write the code that will allow us to connect to our Mongo database. So to create a new file, we can use touch on Mac or copycon on Windows. And here we can pass in the name of the file, index.js. Then we can see we have index.js created. And you can also just create it manually. Now let's open up index.js in our code editor of choice. So here I have opened up index.js in Visual Studio. It's just a blank page initially. Here, let's go ahead and write some code to connect to our Mongo database via our node server. First, we have to specify that we're going to be requiring MongoDB, and we're going to be getting a Mongo client. So we're going to require MongoDB, which is the package that we just installed together via npm install MongoDB. This is the native driver. Then we're going to use .mongo client because we are getting a client from MongoDB. Next up, we have to specify the URL for our Mongo database. That is going to be a string, and the convention and the syntax is to type MongoDB followed by a colon and 2 forward slashes. Then you can use localhost, which is just the keyword shortcut for 127.0.0.1 as the URL. Then we have the port number, which is 27017. So this is the URL to our Mongo database, and it's always going to be this regardless of the computer that you're on. Next up, we are going to connect to our Mongo database. So for that, we grab our Mongo client and we use the connect function. Here we pass in the URL to our database. After that, we can pass in an argument here, use new URL parser. We'll set this to true. And we can also here catch any error and the client that we are in. So here we can then have a callback function to perform some kind of action after the connection has been made. So here we are going to have the Mongo client connect to our URL of choice, which we already specified. Then we have an argument, use new URL parser as true. Then we are going to here do something with our result, taking in an error and a client. Okay, let me close this callback function before I forget. We can check if there is an error, then we'll return console.log of the error. And otherwise, if there's not an error, then we can continue. So this return statement, it will make sure that this is the last line that gets executed in the function. But if there is no error, then we can continue on. Here, we can store a reference to a database. So let's make here a variable let database. And then inside of the client, we can here take database and assign it to equal our client, which is this argument of who we connected to. Then we're going to use client.db and pass in here our database name. So let's create a constant for the database name. Const database name equals a string. This should be the name of your database. Remember, we created the courses database together. Well, that is the database we're going to be accessing. And also, just by convention in JavaScript, you should put semicolons at the end of your lines. So here, we're specifying that we want to connect to the database named courses. Remember, in there we had a collection called Web Dev Courses. So we are accessing our Mongo database via a client. We're taking the client's database that is called courses, and we're saving that. And then we can paste out our results. We can console.log out the database name. So here we can use a formatted string. With these backticks, we can specify the database. We can use a $sign followed by curly brackets to enclose the variable we want to paste. Let's paste out the database name. Then we can also paste out the URL of the connection. So here we'll call console.log and use a formatted string again. Here into the formatted string, I'm going to pass in connected MongoDB and pass in a $sign with curly brackets to fill in a variable. I'm going to send the URL. So we're going to be shown the database name and the URL only if we were able to successfully connect. So this will tell us if we were able to connect to our Mongo database. So how do we actually test this out? Well, we can use Node to launch index.js. Join me back in your terminal and make sure you're inside of your project folder. Also, make sure that your Mongo daemon is still running. Then here, we're going to use Node to start our server. Currently, the only file we have is index.js, so that is what we're going to launch. We're going to launch index.js. And look at that, we get our two messages logged out. We get the database courses, and we get the connected Mongo database at the URL, which is the typical URL used for Mongo databases. So this means we've been able to connect to our local Mongo database that was called courses. And we were able to do so with the MongoDB package and a Node server. So we were able to use the MongoDB native driver. Coming up from here, what you can do now is you can create your whole website and you can grab data from the Mongo database and use it in the site. And we'll be doing that later on in this course, where we build out a larger project of a website where we use data that is hosted on the Mongo database and we display that data on the site. And we can update that data in the database and it will be permanent storage. But for now, we've just been able to create a simple Node server, and we've been able to verify that the server can connect to the database. So we just have the back end here. We don't actually have a front end of the website. We just have the back end. We have the database. We have the server. The front end would be listening for a request of a user to visit a page like the home page, and then sending the user some kind of HTML, JavaScript, and data so that they could see something on the home page. We'll do that later on in this course. For now, we're going to look at one more way that we can connect to MongoDB, and that is via Mongoose. And this actually makes it easier to connect to MongoDB, arguably. Mongoose is preferred by a lot of developers, so I'm going to show you how you can use Mongoose because it's very commonly used. So join me in our next project. We're going to work in the next lecture on something very similar, a similar project, but we connect via Mongoose instead of the Mongo native driver. Hello everyone and welcome back to our course. In our previous lecture, we learned how to connect to MongoDB via Node, our Node server, and a Mongo native driver. Many developers use Mongoose instead of the Mongo native driver. So in this lecture, we're going to learn how to use Mongoose as an alternative to our MongoDB package. So let's kill our previous server with Control-C. Make sure your Mongo daemon is still running though if you want to be able to access the database. Here, we're going to create a new project. So let me cd one parent up, and then here I'm going to make a new directory, and I'm going to call this Hello Mongoose. Okay, then we have to cd into Hello Mongoose if we want to actually be in that folder. Here inside of this folder, we are going to create a new node project with npm. So we'll call npm init and hit enter. Here we can quickly go through all of the different metadata. Just hit enter to go through them. And here we are going to list out our contents. We see we have package.json. We can call npm install to install any required packages, which by default we don't have any. I'm going to install our first package for this project, and that will be Mongoose. So I'll use npm install mongoose -- save. Hit enter, and that will install our first package, which will now be inside of a folder node modules. Here, let's create index.js, and that is going to allow us to write the server for this project. So I'm going to use touch here on Mac in order to create a new file, and I'm going to call this index.js. So just like we did earlier, and that's copy con instead of touch on Windows. Then let's go ahead and open up our index file with a code editor. Here I am inside of index.js for hello mongoose. By default, it will be an empty file. Here we're going to create a constant mongoose to store a reference to our package mongoose, which is the package that we just installed via npm. So now we can use mongoose. Now when you use mongoose, you can grab the object and use .connect to connect to some database URL. So we do have to define the database URL. Let's create a new constant called database URL. This will be a string, so in quotation marks, single or double. Here you pass in MongoDB as per usual. Then you have your 2 forward slashes followed by localhost. Localhost is just the keyword for 127.0.0.1, which just refers to your computer hosting a site rather than the internet hosting a site. So we're referencing some kind of local site or local URL that's just available on our computer. Then our computer can access the data and send it wherever it wants. So we have localhost at port 27017. That is the port for MongoDB. Now for Mongoose, the connection URL should include your database name, which is courses in our case. Remember, we created that Mongo database courses and we put in 2 courses. Well, that is what we're referencing here. Then we can also pass into this connect function some arguments, such as here, use new URL parser, which we'll set to true. Okay, so there we go. We were able to create a connection to Mongoose. Next, we want to verify that the connection was able to succeed. So here we can store a constant database by using mongoose.connection. So when we here connect to Mongoose, it will get a property called connection. And if that is not null, it means you've been able to successfully connect to a database. So when you make a connection via Mongoose, you're basically just getting a database. Then we can use database.once to perform something one time. So one time, the first time when the database opens. We can take in an empty argument here because we're not going to use it, and then open up the callback function, what we want to happen. Let's call console.log, and we can log out connected to database. And we can add here the name of the database, which is going to be at database URL. So it'll be that whole string, actually. And we'll only see this string in the terminal if the database variable is not null. So if we were able to make a connection via Mongoose. We can also listen for errors with database.on error. So this time we're using on instead of once, which means this function, this listener, will do something every time there's an error. And it's good to listen for errors because you never know. You may get an error, and errors do come up frequently, so you want to be able to read them and know what happened. So if there's an error, then we can grab that error and perform some kind of callback function with the error. So what should we do with this error? Well, we can console.log or even use console.error to format it as an error. And we can put in here that this is a connection error because it means that our database had some connection problem. Okay, and here we can then log out the error. Now you can even log out the database itself with console.log database, so you can paste that out here either just after you've created the variable or even once it's already opened. Let's save this index file, and then in our terminal, let's launch the Node server, because this file is going to run when we launch the Node server, and the file is read top down. So first, we're going to connect to our database with Mongoose this time instead of the Mongo native driver. Then, if the database manages to open, we'll get this message logged out. Otherwise, we'll get an error logged out, or perhaps even nothing. It all depends on the scenario. So let's go ahead and go to our terminal. Here in your terminal, make sure you do have the Mongo daemon running because we want to access the database. Then go to your project folder directly, and here we are going to launch our server with Node, followed by the name of our server file, which is index.js in this case. You can hit enter and look at our result. First, we get this huge string, and that's because, remember, we decided to console.log the database. So the database variable or constant was a native connection. The base was Mongoose. It has all these properties that you can access, like connections, models, events, options, pluralize, schema, model, plugins, collections, models, config, replica, options, other databases, related databases, states as well. Disconnected, connected, connecting, disconnecting, uninitialized. And then we have the ready state, close called, etc. Driver info, which is Mongoose. So we're not using the native driver, we're using Mongoose this time to connect to our database. So the driver is how you can connect your server to the Mongo database, either using the Mongo native driver or Mongoose. Very commonly used. The client is a Mongo client. This is the URL for the database that we're accessing. And then we have topology, some more properties, and our initial connection. We also get logged out that we connected to the database at the database URL. So congratulations, you were able to connect to MongoDB via Mongoose. If you're getting an error message here, then just copy the error message and search it up online and you'll find a solution. Awesome. So that is how you can connect to your database with another option. Again, Mongoose is commonly preferred by developers, so it's good to know both ways to connect to MongoDB. Coming up next, we are going to learn more about how to work with MongoDB. We're going to learn how we can build out more projects that are more complex and that take data from MongoDB and that show it to your client on a web page. So we'll have not only this back end, the database and the server, but also the front end, the actual view of the page. So I'll see you in our next section.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching this course. If you want to watch the rest of the course, the link is down below. Not only will you get the access to this course, but you'll get access to a lot of other courses in a huge bundle, and it's on sale today. So buy it before the sale ends. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in another video.